Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about the latest Star Wars film, Solo: A Star Wars Story. Just like the film Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, this is a Star Wars anthology film from Walt Disney Pictures. In between Star Wars installments of this newer trilogy, which is Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and whatever Episode 9 is going to be, Disney's trying to release an anthology film between those years when those movies come out. So we already got Rogue One: A Star Wars Story in 2016. And here in 2018, we have Solo: A Star Wars Story, directed by Ron Howard. Was going to be directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, but they got kicked off the project. But Ron Howard came in to finish it for him. So here we go with this review. I'm going to let you know how I feel about the film. But before I do that, I'm going to give you a synopsis of the film. And just like any of my movie reviews, you guys, I'm going to do a non-spoiler review. So if you haven't seen this film yet, obviously I'm reviewing this probably way earlier than some other people that might get around to seeing it later in the Memorial Day weekend at some point. But like I said, pretty much in all my reviews, they're non-spoiler. So if you haven't seen the film yet, don't worry. I'm not going to spoil anything on you. But in this movie, you guys, Han Solo is a young man. Believe it or not, this film actually takes place before Episode 1 of Phantom Menace. Or The Phantom Menace, I think it is. So Han Solo is very, very young in this. He's probably in his, 18, early 20s or so. And so he has this young girlfriend with him, and he's living on this planet that I don't even remember the name of the planet, to tell you the truth. But they don't really treat anybody that well on it. They don't treat the creatures or the humans very well on it. So Han Solo and his girlfriend are kind of sick of this, so they're trying to escape this planet and try to get away from people that they have debts with. That's kind of a chaotic journey in and of itself to get out of the planet. But Han does eventually meet up with a group of people who are kind of these outlaws who are kind of out to steal stuff, and they kind of get a trade of the money when they do succeed in these missions that they get sent on. So Han Solo joins up with them. Some of these characters consist of people played by Woody Harrelson, Thandie Newton, this alien creature thing that's Jon Favreau voices the creature of in the movie. So Han Solo gets caught up in that, and so we also get to know how he got to meet Chewbacca and Lando Calrissian and all these other significant characters in the Star Wars universe, and kind of how Han Solo knows them and how he got to meet them and all that kind of stuff. So that really is kind of the story of Solo: A Star Wars Story. Is Han Solo as a young man, all the stuff he did before the events of Episode 4: A New Hope, which is basically the prequels. But there's an event that happens that clearly is before Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. That's really all I can say about that. So this story pretty much takes place before Episode 1, at least from what I was able to gather in this movie. But overall, guys, I really enjoyed Solo: A Star Wars Story. It's a fun popcorn movie. It's a fun Star Wars movie. Not the best Star Wars movie, certainly not the worst one, though. I do think probably Episode 1 of Phantom Menace and Episode 2 Attack of the Clones are probably the two weakest Star Wars films for me. And I would even throw Rogue One: A Star Wars Story in there. I thought that one was pretty weak for a Star Wars film as well. But thankfully, I feel like this film is better than those three earlier Star Wars films that I mentioned. Certainly not better than the original trilogy. Those are probably going to be the three best Star Wars movies for most people. And probably not better than Force Awakens or Last Jedi, because I really like those two films as well. But it's kind of right in the middle there. It's kind of in between, not quite as good as the original trilogy, not quite as good as Force Awakens or Last Jedi, but kind of right below that, which I think isn't awful, considering all the Star Wars movies that have been made so far. So, for my overall thoughts, though, for Solo: A Star Wars Story, I'm going to do with my positives first. I think it's a fun adventure of a movie. If you're just there to have a good time, watch a good old-fashioned Star Wars movie take place. They actually do use some practical effects in this one, which is kind of cool. Not for everything, not for every creature and visual, but there is some effort to do more practical things, unlike what Last Jedi did, and even what Rogue One did. So kind of like what Force Awakens did with J.J. Abrams at the helm for that one. Ron Howard brought more practical stuff for this movie, which I thought was pretty cool. Not as much practical stuff as J.J. brought for Force Awakens, but definitely a lot more practical stuff than we saw in some of the more recent Star Wars movies. But overall, I think this is a fun adventure. It's just a fun Star Wars movie. I had a fun time watching it, and I think for a lot of people, that's really going to be more than enough for a Star Wars movie. Another positive I have with this movie is Donald Glover's performance as Lando Calrissian. He perfectly portrayed a young Lando in this. Um, you really think you're watching a young Billy D. Williams, who played Lando Calrissian in the original trilogy. Donald Glover really did feel and had the presence of Billy D. Williams in this movie, which I thought was really impressive, while also kind of having his own spin on everything. But he really kind of had the voice and the presence and the way of speaking and the way that Lando would communicate with people and stuff like that. I thought that was a really cool thing that Donald Glover was able to balance with his performances. He brought his own take to the character while also giving us the Lando Calrissian that Billy D. Williams once gave us, and kind of balancing the two in a very clever way. Paul Bettany plays one of the villainous characters in this film, and I kind of liked his character. What was kind of interesting about his villain was he wasn't one of these villains that would just kill you on the spot if he didn't like you, or wasn't just the evil guy for being the evil guy. He kind of had a point behind him. He kind of wanted to be outside of the rebellion, outside of the empire. He really kind of wanted to be his own thing. He would give people a second chance, but if they messed up on the second chance, obviously there would be major consequences. Um, just kind of an interesting character. He would throw parties for people. He would definitely do good things for people. But you would kind of have to serve him back, which was kind of interesting. And once again, if you kind of messed up on something, expect a long conversation with him. Expect something that might not be as gentle as you would want it to be. So I thought that was kind of clever with his villain. Is he was the bad guy clearly, but there was some understanding behind him, I guess, which I thought was kind of interesting. So huge thumbs up to Paul Bettany. I thought he played a pretty clever villain in this movie. The acting is also very good in this movie. There really isn't a performance that really sticks out like a sore thumb. Really, all the acting is very good in this. Alden Ehrenreich, who was in Hail Caesar, for example, he really played a young Han Solo very well in this movie. The actor who played Chewbacca in this, they used a younger actor because of all the energy needed for the role, and because I think Peter Mayhew, who played the original Chewbacca, was needed for Last Jedi when they filmed scenes for this movie. Emilia Clarke has a role in this. Woody Harrelson has a role in this. Thandie Newton has a role in this. Really, all the acting performances are very, very good in this. Even if they're brief roles and brief characters, everybody really makes the most out of their performance and their characters in this movie. There's also some really fun action scenes in this movie, mostly involving Han Solo, stealing cars or stealing a ship, running the Millennium Falcon himself. I really thought the action scenes were really well helmed in this movie. One scene that really was kind of displayed well in the trailers, and they definitely kept a lot out from the trailers, thankfully, to kind of let you experience the whole thing in the theater, was the Millennium Falcon escaping this octopus creature-looking thing. Like I said, the trailer thankfully doesn't show all this. It is in the trailer. The film definitely has a much more extended version of that that's really, really cool to watch. So they definitely had a good use of the Millennium Falcon, which is also going to go in one of my other positives here in a minute, but also a very huge part of why the action scenes were so good in this movie. The film also establishes why Han Solo is very loose and very, why he definitely can't trust a lot of people. This definitely shows up later in the original trilogy with Star Wars, with Harrison Ford playing Han Solo, and definitely comes up again when he meets up with Lando Calrissian again in The Empire Strikes Back. So I definitely like how this film establishes how Han Solo really has a hard time trusting people. He goes through a lot. He kind of is around people who really don't trust people anyway. A lot of them are thieves. A lot of them are outlaws. A lot of them have trained him and warned him about kind of don't trust these people that you're taking missions from because they're really not very trustworthy. Kind of go in with your own take on it, with your own backup plan, because some of these people are not very forgiving, and so Han Solo learns this very quickly, and it was kind of a cool thing, I thought, that later comes up again in the original trilogy for Star Wars. I really like the young Chewbacca that was used in this movie. They definitely established how Han and Chewbacca kind of communicated with each other, and how that shows up again in the original trilogy, and even in the sequel trilogy, which is currently happening with Force Awakens and Last Jedi, and whenever the Episode 9 title is going to be. So I definitely like the young Chewbacca they use in this movie, so definitely a very clever way to introduce us to Chewbacca while also continuing the Chewbacca character that we know and love from all the earlier Star Wars movies. I also like the use of the Millennium Falcon in this movie, like I brought up during the action scenes point. Um, Fun use of the Millennium Falcon. Definitely a lot of action scenes that use the Millennium Falcon in very cool, clever ways. So if you definitely want to go to this movie for Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon and anything related to the Millennium Falcon, um, definitely a lot of cool action uses of the Millennium Falcon in this movie. For my negatives of this movie, though, I feel like the second act is very slow paced in this movie. Without giving anything away, without kind of um, potentially spoiling anything for anybody, there's a part where Chewbacca and Woody Harrelson are playing like this digital chess thing with each other. And that's kind of around the point for me where the film really kind of slows down and really hits the brakes for a while before going to the next big action scene or going to the next big story point. So I guess that's the closest and the best way I can describe it without spoiling anything. So for those who are planning on seeing the film and have already saw the movie, that's kind of the best description I can provide without spoiling anything. So slow-paced Act 2 that kind of slows the film down a little bit. Another negative I have with the movie is some of the Star Wars references are a little misleading. And this really isn't a spoiler because this character isn't even in this movie. But for those who remember the Rancor from Return of the Jedi, there was a scene in this movie that I thought was supposed to be kind of like symbolic or a reference to a potentially younger Rancor. Unfortunately, they don't go that route. When you find out what it is, it's fine, I guess. But the way they introduce a different character that I wasn't expecting at that point in the story, it would have been kind of cool to see Han Solo going up against a Rancor too, since Luke Skywalker already did that in Return of the Jedi. But there's things like that. There's other things too, where a friend of mine even point out, there's a helmet that's used from the original trilogy that a different character wears. So at first he thought it was the character who originally wore that in the original trilogy, but it's not. It's just a reference. So there's things like that that are really misleading in this movie that I thought could have been better and improved upon, or could have been referenced in a more clever way that didn't confuse as many people as it did. So some of the references to other Star Wars movies they make are a little misleading in this movie. Another negative I have with this movie is there's a character named Cora, played by Emilia Clarke. Without spoiling anything, all I can really say about it that's the negative for me is I thought her character could have been exited better from the movie. I thought her character's closure really wasn't that great. And if anything, it leaves a lot of questions open for what exactly happened to her character, either during the prequels or the original trilogy. The film never clarifies this by the time her character exits out of the movie. So that was another negative I have. We're really probably never going to find out what happened to her, probably ever in any of the Star Wars movies. So that's a huge negative for me there. Another negative I had with this was there was really no significant Star Wars answers on anything. So if you really have a lot of big questions about Han Solo or about, why Greedo has a debt with him and so forth in A New Hope, this film unfortunately never addresses those questions. So I thought they could have done a better job answering potentially big Star Wars questions like Rogue One did with the Death Star. So unfortunately, there isn't any significant Star Wars answers for some of these big questions. So Solo, a Star Wars story, I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's a fun movie. I think it's a fun popcorn Star Wars movie that's just fun to watch on a rainy day or whatever. But like I said, the pacing, some of the misleading references, Quorra's closure, and the lack of significant answers to big Star Wars questions is ultimately what wears the film down for me a little bit. So 8.5 out of 10 for me. It's a fun film. There's just some problems with this movie as well.